What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at Manchester City versus PSG in the Champions League semifinals first leg. Now before we start, my book is out, so make sure you check it out in the description below. There's a link. Also links to Keyframe, which is how I made the second half of this video, and to the membership option and how you can get a free copy of my book. But let's get right into it because there's a lot to talk about. So Manchester City in possession, they went with a more traditional back four in their build-up phase. They had Kyle Walker and Cancelo play a little bit wider and deeper to prevent dangerous transitions from PSG. PSG lined up in their 4-4-2, and to create progressive connections, Manchester City looked most dangerous when Rodri was the single pivot, and this gave him connections to each of the three central corridors in advanced areas, but they often went with Gundogan alongside Rodri to have a little bit more control and have more players behind the ball to prevent dangerous transitions of Kylian Mbappe, Neymar, Di Maria, just to name a few on PSG. So a little bit different from Pep, but Cancelo and Walker played their roles really well. So when the ball would go into the wide area, Cancelo could come deeper, and this was also an attempt to pull PSG further forward and a bit wider to stretch the connections these players made, and this would create a more defined superiority further up the field, in this case a wide rotation or a wide structure to get Gundogan on the ball between the lines. But more often than not, we saw Gundogan come deeper alongside Rodri with Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva through the half spaces, and this created strong connections into the half space, but gave them more security behind the ball more than anything. Then going further up the field, we have more or less the same shape, but more often than not, Cancelo and Walker would tuck into the half spaces, playing much more narrow, allowing Rodri to be the single pivot with three players between the line and Foden and Mahrez holding the width. So now PSG in possession, they went with their usual back four build-up with Navas splitting them, and in possession, PSG were much more dangerous in their initial build-up and their midfield third because they had space in behind Manchester City's defensive block to then progress into. They went with their double pivot to give them security in possession, and their fluid midfield three with Verratti coming into the team now and giving him more vertical mobility. Neymar and Mbappe looked most dangerous when they were outside the shoulder of the central defenders, and Mbappe was higher, pinning the back four while creating space for Neymar. What Manchester City did to counter this, they pushed Walker and Cancelo further forward to limit the impact Verratti and Di Maria had on the game, and this still gave them a numerical superiority in their last line of defense, with Rodri more or less man-marking Neymar and Diaz and Stones splitting Mbappe between the two of them and limiting the space Mbappe had to run into the channels and in behind the two central defenders. So in the midfield third, we saw PSG use the full width and created by their fullbacks. Di Maria would go into a little bit wider position, but the main space that PSG would target would be the central three corridors. And here we can start to look at the Neymar and Mbappe partnership and how these two were able to create space, and they were most dangerous when they were in the same vertical corridor and Mbappe was pinning two defenders to then create space for Neymar because of his pinning. So now let's get into the keyframe aspect of the video. And first we're going to look at the tactical change that Pep made in the match after the first 20 minutes. So here we have in the 16th minute, they pressed in more or less a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-3-3. We saw the 8 Ilkay Gundogan and Bernardo Silva, they jumped to the double pivot of PSG, and what this did is it left Rodri between the lines to then pick up players like Neymar, Di Maria, and Verratti, all occupying these advanced central corridors. And from here, the width and the first line of City's press was very much overextended and gave them room to play out, which after then their press was broken, this left dangerous spaces for PSG and actually played into their hands and allowed PSG to use this space. But the change that was made, we can also see that Kyle Walker and then on the weak side Cancelo would jump between the lines. So this would leave Neymar free with Mbappe pinning the two central defenders. So after the first line was broken because of the excess space and the mid-range passes were on, players like Neymar were able to find the ball, and Mbappe had room to run in behind. So the solution came when PSG were in possession now, a little bit higher up the field for this example, but we can still see the width being created by the fullbacks and the versatility of the double pivot, staggering to use the half space, but we see the Manchester City structure and pressing in their 4-4-2, or higher up the field, their 4-2-4. So what this did is it gave them much better access to the first line of the PSG build-up, limited the space that these players had to prevent PSG from breaking the initial press, which then limited the space that players like Mbappe and Neymar were able to find, because the press was very efficient and didn't allow PSG to have controlled progression. And we see the Manchester City back four here, and they're matching up man-to-man with the PSG front four, including Di Maria, Neymar, Mbappe, and on the weak side, Marco Verratti playing higher up the field. So this was a very risky strategy, but it made sense in how the game was going, and it limited the access these players had to get free. Neymar looked most dangerous, and PSG looked most dangerous when Neymar and Mbappe were in the same vertical corridor. Mbappe was higher, pinning the defender in that area, and then this gave Neymar more room to drop deeper and collect the ball in more advanced areas. But with the new form of pressing, this was limited by cover shadows and an effective timing of the press and arriving in the right areas to press the first line. So now Manchester City in possession. We saw a much different Manchester City in terms of structure, with their fullbacks rather than inverting as Cancelo is doing here. So this was more or less a one-off in the game. Cancelo didn't invert because the goal of Manchester City in possession was to stretch PSG horizontally to then expose them between the lines. So as we see, PSG are playing their 4-4-2, and when Cancelo does invert, what this does is it allows PSG to play much more narrow, which in some instances can be very beneficial because it leaves Mahrez and Foden, or Mahrez and Foden, or Mahrez and Gundogan in this position in a much vacated space. But in terms of progressing through the central corridors, an inverted fullback against this 4-4-2 of PSG didn't make much sense. So we saw more of a Gundogan play this role, and having a deeper back four to then be their first line of their build-up, which allowed PSG, or forced PSG, to press over a larger distance and creating more space in advanced areas for Manchester City. So PSG in possession in the first half. We can take a look at how Manchester City countered this in their 4-4-2 in their midfield third, and what was happening, and when PSG were most dangerous is when Marco Verratti or Neymar, or Mbappe or Neymar, or when Neymar was able to find these overloads between the lines and become the free player in these advanced areas. And Manchester City were very good about making Neymar the free player in ineffective areas. So what I mean by this is when the ball's on the weak side, Neymar isn't a potential player to receive the ball. And with Di Maria's tendency to occupy wider positions as the possession goes higher up the field, they were able to control the most dangerous area of the field relatively easily, because they picked their moments when to become more man-oriented, when Neymar was a danger of getting on the ball, and when they just used their compactness and their shifting principles to control the space when Neymar wasn't an option in possession. So the typical Manchester City possession saw Cancelo in the wide area, two central defenders, and Walker a little bit deeper, but also a little bit more narrow in possession to give them more security in transition. So here, Cancelo is going wider and a little bit higher, with Ilkay Gundogan being the double pivot with Rodri, which was most of the times the case. We see Phil Foden in the second half starting to invert a little more, because in the first half he looked a little bit isolated, so occupying these spaces between the lines. And we have Bernardo Silva playing on the same side as Riyad Mahrez, allowing them to use positional interchanges to vary their positioning and use their qualities in different ways. So when Phil Foden would invert, Oftentimes the space was then in the wide area because of an over-compact PSG, which gave Manchester City the wide route to progress the ball. So when Zinchenko came on for Cancelo, it seemed this substitution was forced because of Cancelo's yellow card. They didn't want to risk anything happening and going a man down. So we see the same structure in possession, which most of the time consisted of Ilkay Gundogan alongside Rodri, and with Foden, Kevin De Bruyne, and Bernardo Silva between the lines, with Riyad Mahrez and Zinchenko now holding the width with Kyle Walker and the double pivots controlling the space in a little bit deeper area to give them more security if they were to lose possession, with players like Neymar and Mbappe as the front two, and then we see the rest of PSG's 4-4-2. So that's the analysis, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to the second leg, so I'll see you there.